So medical, legal, ethical. We'll talk briefly on ethical decisions, but mainly we will stick to the medical type things. When we look at the first definition, and again, a lot of these are just definitions, but you need to understand fully what that definition means. It's just not a surface definition. You've really got to understand what this means. The first one is the scope of practice. The way that I determine the scope of practice is that's what you can do. So as EMTs, you have a scope of practice. This is what you can do as an EMT. Anything that you do outside of that is outside of the scope of practice, and you essentially end up practicing medicine without a license. You practice medicine without a license, and you go to jail, right? So these things are determined primarily here by the state and national, but primarily by the state. They say EMTs in the state of Texas can do this. Now, it's pretty straightforward for the most part. Whatever you're taught in this class, then you can do. I'm not going to teach you anything that's outside of your scope of practice. So you have to be very careful here to make sure that all your skills and everything that you do is something that you're taught and that's in your scope of practice. So the easy thing to remember about the scope of practice is those are the things that you can do. Anything outside of that is outside your scope of practice, and you can't do those. Like I cannot do emergency C-sections. It's outside of my scope of practice. I could probably figure it out, but I can't do that. I haven't been trained, or I don't have a protocol for that, and it's outside my scope of practice. So you look at everything that you do, and you better stay within that scope of practice.
So for us, would it be like giving IVs?
Yeah, that would be outside your scope of practice. Yeah, IVs, intubation, for right now, is outside of your scope of practice. We're going to learn how to do that, just for your general knowledge, but that's outside of your scope. So if they try to get you to start an IV at the hospital, you say, oh, I can't do that. That's outside of my scope of practice. I'm not trained to do that. All right? So that's a pretty easy definition. So the scope of practice, what you can do. And then the other one is the standard of care. And that's the standard of care is how you do it. Every level has a certain standard of care. Like my standard of care for a paramedic would consist of what other paramedics with my same years experience and training would do. So if I ever had a problem, if I did something that, let's say that the patient was having chest pain, cardiac-related chest pain, it looked like she was having a heart attack, and I didn't give the patient oxygen. And that patient suffered from me not giving them oxygen. They could tell that the patient went on and had a heart attack and had debilitating injuries from that heart attack. And so what would happen is, once they started the litigation process, the other attorney for the person who's having the heart attack, they would call expert witnesses. And they would get a handful of paramedics with my same experience, training, and background. And they would get on the stand and they would say, I swear to tell the truth, blah, 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 blah. Lawyer would get up and say, if you had a patient having cardiac-related chest pain, would you give them oxygen? Yes. That's the standard of care. Then the next one would get up and say the same thing, and the next one would get up and say the same thing. And really, after about 2 or 3, they proved you violated the standard of care because everybody else would have done that. They would have gave oxygen to that cardiac patient. You should give oxygen to the cardiac patient. So it could be you up there. You didn't give oxygen, so they had a handful of brand new EMTs up there, and there's brand new EMTs would say, yes, I'd give them oxygen, yes, I'd give them oxygen. And after 2 or 3, the court's going, yeah, they violated the standard of care. Now, On the other hand, now that's in the litigation, right? Someone's suing you for not doing your job, which is negligence, and we'll talk about in a minute. But let's say you're a brand new EMT and you didn't give the patient oxygen, and they filed against you at the state level, right? So now you go to Austin to defend for your certification, and you're sitting in front of a panel, and the panel saying, why didn't you give this patient oxygen? And through that same sort of process, they would determine that you violated the standard of care, and they would remove your, potentially remove your certification from you.
And what kind of cases would they discard that?
What do you mean?
And like if he wasn't to give oxygen to the patient and he needed it, and what kind of cases would they discard it because of a good reason? Like what kind of good reason?
Probably none. Yeah, giving oxygen is essential in most things as far as EMT. So you almost always give oxygen. So that wouldn't be a deal. Let me show you this EMS magazine over here for a second. Ethical wise, you can't go into healthcare and be unethical. Okay? You have to have good ethics. You have to do what is right. Alright? I'm not saying that what is right is all the time the best, the most popular thing to do, but you have to do what is right. I tell everybody, you make a mistake in EMS or in medicine, you go to your supervisor, you tell them you made a mistake, and you live with the consequences. That's just life. Okay? You can't get past that. You make a mistake, you admit to it, and you go and you live with whatever the consequences are. How Texas works most of the time, you make a mistake, you report it, they come down and do their investigation, and if you're up front with them, a lot of times they may suspend you, your certification, or probate it, or something, or reprimand, right? They may do something like that. If you fight them and lie to them, and they have to do all this investigation, then they're going to more than likely revoke your certification or license, and you'll never get it back. Now, I always use the same thing when people try to, because I've been in these type of investigations before, and a lie or a cover-up looks really good while you're on the inside. I always use the story about the dog pooping in the floor. Say you're about to have company and the dog gives a big pile right there in the floor, right? You don't want to clean it up quite yet, so what you do, you put a box over it so nobody can see the poo. And as long as you stay in the room, you get used to the smell, right? The same way with a lie or a cover-up, the more times you tell it, the more like truth that it sounds, right? Oh, this sounds true. It sounds even more true the fifth time I told it. Until when?
Until someone,
Yeah. So you're in this room now, and you've been in that room long enough where the poo smell doesn't really bother you anymore. You open the door and your company comes in, and what's the first thing that they're going to do? Smells like crap in here. Smells like dog poop. Alright? So instantly they're going to be able to see that and they'll say, something's not right. And how long is it going to take for them to use their senses to walk over, and lift up the box and go, look, why did you cover up this dog poop? Instead of cleaning it up. Right? So and it doesn't take long. When you have especially someone that knows how to tell when people's lying, like an investigator, bet your dad knows how when you're lying, right? It doesn't take long for someone trained to know the different things about when you're lying. One, our own words get us. If you listen to the words people say, most of the time that's what's going to convict you. People are generally not good liars. So you got to be a good liar. If you're not a good liar, then you don't get caught. But it's just easier just to tell the truth, admit to your mistake, be ethical about what you're doing, because that will build later. Unethical people become more and more unethical until the point where it's prison time now. You know, they get caught in something big and then they go to prison. So, do what you're supposed to and do what's right all the time, and then you won't have to worry. That's why when, like school here, I don't ever have any concern about the things I do at school or the things I do at home. I come to work, I do what I'm supposed to at work, okay? And then I go home. So at no time during the day do I have a problem with anybody coming in the classroom or seeing what we're doing, because I'm doing primarily what we're supposed to be doing, right? So there's no concern about that. I don't go home thinking about, oh, I hope I don't get caught for that, because I don't do that to get caught for. Does that make sense? So it's much easier living that way instead of always trying to look over your back wondering if you're going to get caught. And in medicine, it's the same way. You know, you don't do the treatment that you should, or you do treatment that you shouldn't. That's going to stay back there, and you're going to be worried about that for a long period of time. All right. Good there? Let's talk about consent. This is another thing that will get you into trouble. The person, the patient, has the right to refuse treatment. And there's several different types of consent. The first type of consent here is express consent. So they express that they want treatment. An expression of treatment, if you ask if you could take a blood pressure and I hold my arm out, that's an expressed consent. If you come into the house and on the ambulance and I motion you over, that's expressed consent. But everything that you do, you have to gain consent on. You're going to put oxygen on the patient. Ask them. That's why they get all these weird questions. I'm going to put some oxygen on you, okay? The okay part is me asking you permission to do that. I need to take your blood pressure. Is that okay? So you always gain permission to do all the treatment. The other one that's not on here is informed consent. I think they just break it down to expressed and implied now, but informed consent is if I need to give you oxygen, I'm saying you're having trouble breathing, this oxygen will help your trouble breathing. I'm informing you of your condition and what I'm going to give to help you with that condition. All right? So that's informed consent. So express consent is when you express to me that you want treatment. Informed consent is when you tell the patient what you're doing and they agree to the treatment. All right? Everybody good with that? Implied consent, I hate the word assumed, but implied or an implication fits for an unconscious person. So if the person's unconscious, or applies to a lot of you guys that are under the age of 18, you're not legal adults yet. So if I was to come to your house for some reason on the ambulance and you're under the age of 18 and you don't want to go to the hospital, and I deem it necessary for you to go, then I'm essentially your legal guardian. I'm treating you under implied consent. The implication is that your parents would want me to treat you. All right? For the unconscious person, that the implication that they're unconscious and they would want treatment. Right? So that's implied consent. Minors and people that are unconscious, the only difference with the minor is that if they're pregnant, they're emancipated. If they're pregnant, that means that they have legal consent. So if you're 13 years old and you're pregnant, then you're emancipated. You can make your own medical decisions. There's a little gray area about after you have the baby, whether or not, but we won't get into that. So if you're emancipated, you can have, or if you have a legal document saying, I'm emancipated from my parents, then you're considered a legal adult.
Why did they decide to make a pregnant girl?
I don't have any idea. Wish I knew.
Because you're over
Yeah, I guess you're about to be a parent, but
Which you also not
yeah. So this is where
Can you go back real quick?
the other thing that they're getting into here is you have to know these consents, because if you take someone against their will, that's a form of kidnapping. And that's a criminal crime. So you go to jail for that.
So what if, like, say I was at a friend's house and my friend thought I needed medical help and they forced me to go to the hospital, but then I was like, I don't want to be here. Like, would you have to make them stay because your friend brought you?
No, they would make you stay because you're a minor until your parents came up and took responsibility. The same way, and this happens quite a bit. That's a pretty good example. Let's say you start having some kind of emotional breakdown. A boyfriend broke up with you or something. You start having you start hyperventilating. Your friend calls 911. Ambulance comes out to your house. You've already settled back down. You forgot about him. You're on to something new. Okay? You're okay. I evaluate you and determine that, yes, it would be better for you to go to the hospital. You're going to the hospital, whether you want to or not. You don't have a choice. You're a minor, and I'm treating you under implied consent. You don't have a choice to go. So see the way that would fit?
What if they came into your house to treat you, and then they evaluated you and all that, and you refused to leave your house, and they're inside the house?
Then her dad would come and handcuff you and put you on the cot. Yeah, that's a good question. Let's say you refuse to go. You're absolutely refusing to go. There's no problem, because me and my partner is going to pick you up and put you on the cot, whether you want to or not. It's sort of the same way. You can go the hard way or the easy way, right? But typically in that situation, the police would be involved. So I would tell the police, I would say, she needs to go to the hospital. And they would get on the cot. And you would, like I say, do it the easy way or the hard way. You would go, because of the implied consent. So then the police could potentially file on you for obstruction.
What if your friend's parents didn't want you to go? Like, they're not your parents, but they're like your friend's parents.
No, it doesn't matter.
It has to be your parents.
Your legal guardian.
Okay.
All right. So again, another web of all this, because quite honestly, a house full of minors is a nightmare when it comes to EMS.
What if they start fighting you and it becomes dangerous? Would you just leave? Or?
No, I'm not afraid of her.
For me?
I mean, a minor. No. If it's a man child or something, then I'm going to call the police, and the police are going to take care of you. And another thing about that as well is a lot of people, I inform them before we get into these altercations, but it is a felony to strike a healthcare provider, a public servant, which I would be in that case.
So if I was to hit you right now, I'm getting a lot of trouble.
I'd charge you with a felony assault, because it's a felony to strike a public servant.
Even like if you're out of the county where you work?
No, I mean on duty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So quite a bit of differences. Wait, we skipped one, I think. Yeah. Minors, implied consent. I forgot what this means. Oh, that's the thing with the school.
Is that Spanish?
Yeah. Loco's crazy, right?
Yeah.
The thing with the school. The
Crazy parents?
crazy parents. The thing with the school is if we went on a field trip, let's say we go to the EMS conference,
I'm white.
I'm your legal guardian. When you go on tennis matches or whatever, that coach or whoever that is your legal guardian. If your parents are not there, that school official is your legal guardian. So they make the decision for you. Anything other, emancipated, we talked about that, life-threatening injuries, minors who have children, that's always a complicated thing. And minors in the armed forces also sort of complicates it. You can serve your country, but you can't make up your mind whether or not to go to the hospital. Question?
What happens if you get a call about a child and it's like just a citizen or whatever, not really like their guardian, and you can't get a hold of the parents, would you still continue treatment over?
Yeah, I take them to the hospital. If I couldn't get a hold of your parents, and you just go to the hospital with them. I turn you over. Then I would release my responsibility to the hospital. Now your provider's the hospital. I mean your guardian until your parents get there.
You're replaced the parents sort of?
Huh?
You're replacing the parents sort of, like you still do everything that you want. Like,
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be. I can make medical decisions for you.
What if
Yes.
there's like a really smart girl that knows her leeway, let's just say that, and she lies and says that she's pregnant, so they treat her, and then they find out that she's not pregnant.
Yeah, another thing that with this, you're not held responsible if the patient lies to you. Like if you were to tell me, if I come out and you were to tell me, that's another good example. If I was to come out to your house, like you were saying, and treat you and say, I don't want to be treated, I'm 18. I said, okay, being 18, so then you could sign a patient refusal, and then it comes back like you were 16, or 17, and there was a problem there, then I'm not responsible for your lie.
So they document it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, she said she was 18. I don't check IDs, Now, if you look 12 and you say you're 18, I'm not like, well, produce some sort of ID with that. But if you look 18, then you probably, you are, but still not responsible for your lie. Mentally incompetent patients, this would be another deal where you would treat them under implied consent. Now that's another sticky point here. What's competent? What makes a person competent? Y'all remember that?
Yes.
You're alert and you're oriented to person, place, time, and event. So if you're above the age of 18, and you know who you are, you know where you are, you know essentially what time it is, time frame, and the events leading up to us meeting, then you're considered a competent adult. And you can make choices based on that. If I deem that you're going to die without treatment, I tell you that if you don't receive this treatment, you're going to die, and you're alert and oriented to person, place, time, and event, you can still refuse treatment, even if you're going to die.
That doesn't count as suicidal.
No. Now, suicide is different. If you're alert and oriented to person, place, time, and event, and you indicate to me that you're going to hurt yourself, then you lose all your rights. You're the same as a minor. Yeah, because you're going to be treated on implied consent. That happens all the time. I get people saying, that they try to commit suicide, or they made statements that they tried to hurt themselves, and there's like fighting us, and I'm not going, you're not going to do that to me. And in the end, we do what we have to do to treat the patient. We have to restrain them, and do our treatment on them. But they lose all their rights as with attempted suicide.
Restrain them and then they punch in the face.
They'll go to jail. Yeah. So remember that. Person, place, time, and event. Above the age of 18, you're essentially mentally competent. We'll talk about that more. These other ones, involuntary transports and all that, court orders, all this gets into a deal, especially with court orders. I've done a lot of transports where they've had a psychological problem, okay, and the court has ordered them to go to a psychiatric hospital. And they call an ambulance to take them to the psychiatric hospital. There's a problem with that. Is that we're not police officers. We're not officers of the court in EMS. So if a judge comes up and gives me an order to take this person to the hospital, I'm like, I'll take them. But as soon as we clear the doors of the hospital, if they want to leave, they can leave. Because I can't hold a patient against their will.
You have to call the cops and tell them they left.
Right. The police can do that because the police can place a person under arrest, right, to stop them in custody. EMS cannot do that if the person is alert and oriented person, place, time, event. We could get charged with transporting a person or keeping a person against their will. That's a felony. You're going to jail for that. So a lot of more legal things to worry about. These are all sort of sticky problems that take place because you do that. You'll see that in a hospital. Somebody's going over to the psychiatric hospital and you have an order to take them over there. But like I did all the other times, I informed the hospital, I can't execute this order because it's outside of what I do. I'm not a law enforcement personnel. If you want to execute this order properly, then I need a law enforcement officer to come with us and execute this. Because that police officer or sheriff can hold that person. That police officer is an officer of the court. We're not. It's a huge problem in EMS that they refuse to resolve. The correct way would be the police come with the person. Then, if they wanted to leave, the police officer could keep them from leaving. They would leave as soon as they get out of the hospital if they wanted to. Couldn't stop them. You can refuse. They can refuse treatment. Just be careful with the refusal because of the fact that they can come back and say, oh, you coerced them into not wanting to take them to the hospital. You can still be, all the paperwork they signed and refuse treatment and everything and sign a no-ride waiver, you're still held liable for that. So you have to be very careful with patient refusals. Very good documentation, the right signatures, all that. You could still end up in court over that. But if you got good witnesses, then you don't. Let's say we're partners and you're refusing treatment and you signed a thing and your friend over here, I have her sign as a witness that you refused our care. But later something happened and we end up in court, that document is going to be produced and the evidence that's saying both me and my partner, we encouraged you to go to the hospital, you refused treatment, that's all well documented in there, and you have a witness that's not my partner or a fireman as a witness saying that you did this. Now she could lie in court, right, and perjure herself, but again, that's easily found out. So those are cases about refusals. You want to be very careful on patient refusals because 85% of all EMS calls don't necessitate an ambulance. So there's a lot of patient refusals out there. Someone just panics and calls the 911 and you get out there, it's not really an emergency. So they're refusing treatment. So those things you have to be most careful of. So make sure that you sit down, you discuss it with the patient, you contact the member, you have someone in authority there, you get the right documentation with this, and you document what the patient tells you in quotes. Like if they say, I'm not going to the hospital, get out of my house. So when I documented that, I would put in quotes, patient said, quotes, I'm not going to the hospital, get out of my house, quotes. And I would document that and then have witnesses sign that heard that, and we would leave their house. So if we ever did end up in court, then I would have this documentation. That's why your English class is so important, because you don't want a bunch of misspelled words and that. We'll go over documentation and all this, but you want it, when you go to court with that type of document, you want it well written. You have all this stuff that don't make any sense, all these misspelled words in it, they're going to eat you alive in court. So being able to write a good document, paper, patient care report is very important. Okay, we already went over that. Have a witness, a relative, a friend, and for sure document things. When you look at these other two things, you have advanced directives like a DNR, do not resuscitate. That is a legal document. A do not resuscitate order in Texas, they have a form, a do not resuscitate form that comes out. It's considered assault if you resuscitate the patient that has a DNR. They say, we get to the story where they do CPR on someone, you revive them, you save their life, they had a DNR, they could file charges on you for assault because they had a valid do not resuscitate order. Even though you saved their life and they're living again, they could file charges against you. So do not resuscitate means do not resuscitate. Even if the patient died and the family could file charges, criminal charges on you for assault because they had a do not resuscitate order. It has to be present.
Yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
It's like if you don't know for that.
Yeah. If you don't know, then you start CPR. You resuscitate the patient. It has to be present. Where they say, here's the DNR. You look at it. The signatures are there. The state seal's there. It's a valid DNR. Walk away. The patient's family, immediate family, say, no, we don't want that. We want you to do CPR. We want you to try to resuscitate the patient. Then you have to pull the family aside and explain to them that this is a legal binding document, that you can't do CPR, that this binds you legally.
Can they sue you afterwards, saying that you didn't do it?
They could. Of course, you can sue everybody for anything, right? I could sue you for wearing a red hoodie, but it wouldn't go very far. Neither would that. Once you produce the DNR in court, the judge would throw it out. It's like if they're a DNR. This is done. Okay. You have someone that has legal power of attorney for health care. See this a lot with the elderly. Their children have legal power of attorney, and they want them to go to the hospital. It's just like you. As a minor, your parents have authority over that. So if they have legal power of attorney, even though the person's alert and oriented, person, place, time, event, their child has legal power of attorney, you do what the child tells you to do. Transport the patient. Does that make sense? So that even though the patient doesn't want to go, the child with the legal power of attorney is telling you to take Pops to the hospital, you take Pops to the hospital. He doesn't have a choice over that. Now, the other hand, if they don't have the legal power of attorney, you have 99-year-old grandpa that's alert and oriented times 4, and he's sick, but he's alert and oriented times 4 to person, place, time, and event. You have the son over here telling you that you're going to take Pops to the hospital. What do?
And so you have to ask for his permission.
Right. He has to give you permission. Right. Or you're taking him against your will.
That happened to my grandpa. he refused treatment and my dad convinced him.
Now, if he convinced him to go and he said, okay, I'll go, that's a different story.
That's what we did.
What if they're like, okay, I'll go, and then they change their mind when they're in the ambulance?
They
Like,
can
"No,
leave.
Oh.
We'll let them out. Yeah. If they change their mind 3 blocks down the road, we'll let them out. We'll stop the ambulance. So you sure about this? Sign the refusal, get out of the ambulance.
You have to make them walk.
Happens a lot with people in jail. They get out of jail, they go to the hospital, they release them on a PR bond. As soon as we drive away, they say, I don't want to go anymore. They get up and walk out of the ambulance.
When they're like free.
Yeah.
But what if they're caught being